Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Family Matters interview series. Thank you for choosing to join the presentation tonight, and we're very happy to have you here with us. Just a couple reminders that all of the lines will be muted throughout tonight's presentation. So if you have any questions, you can go ahead and enter them into the chat box, and someone from the BCAT team will respond to you within 2 to 3 business days. We are pleased to have Dr. William Mansbach back with us tonight to discuss the topic, Understanding the Progression of Alzheimer's and Related Dementias Over Time. Dr. Mansbach is the founder and chief executive officer of Mansbach Health Tools, which supports the BCAT Research Center. He is also the chief executive officer and president of Counterpoint Health Services, a multidisciplinary behavioral healthcare company specializing in geriatrics and dementia care. For many years, he was the chief operating officer of the largest geriatric behavioral healthcare company in the United States, specializing in long-term care. Dr. Mansbach has an international reputation as a researcher, clinician, and consultant in the aging field. He was a pioneer in the development of memory clinics and is the creator of the BCAT and Enrich systems, which integrate cognitive tests, interventions, and dementia prevention programs. He is the co-author of the award-winning book, Brain Health as You Age, a practical guide to maintenance and prevention. Dr. Mansbach's most recent peer-reviewed articles can be found on the BCAT Research Center page. And joining Dr. Mansbach is Lynn Young. She is the Director of Strategic Integration at Mansbach Health Tools. So Lynn and Dr. Mansbach, I will turn it over to you.
Hey everybody, thanks for taking the time to join us today. We are joined by Dr. William Mansbach today for our Family Matters discussion. Dr. Mansbach, welcome.
Thank you, Lynn. Nice to be with you again.
Thanks for taking the time to join us.
Sure.
Can you tell our family members a little bit about your background, and then we'll jump right into our topic today.
Well, that's great. Happy to be here. Hello to family members. And I understand you often have clinicians who listen to the Family Matters series as well. So greetings to them as well. As many people know, my background is in neuropsych and in memory care. I'm the director of the BCAT Research Center and the CEO of Counterpoint Health Services. A long history of working with patients, working with families, as a clinician, of course, as a researcher, and as a consultant. So this topic of dementia is one that I'm familiar with, like to talk about, but particularly like to talk with families about issues related to dementia.
Great, thank you for sharing that. So in today's segment, we'll really be talking a lot about Alzheimer's disease and even some of the other dementias. I know we're going to spend a lot of our time talking about the progression of dementia, kind of what to expect, but I thought it might make sense for our family members if we could start with maybe just defining dementia and talking a little bit about the symptoms so that we're all starting from the same place.
That's a good idea, Lynn, because there's a lot of confusion about what dementia is. Is it the same as Alzheimer's disease? How do we make sense of it? And for family members who are living and breathing with the symptoms of dementia, sometimes there's real confusion. So let me present it in a way that I think makes the most sense for family members. So dementia has kind of 5 features that you will recognize in the loved one. So one way to think about it is like this. First, for someone to meet criteria for dementia, there must be a significant downward change in cognitive ability. So if someone, let's say, has had a pervasive cognitive disorder or disability and they've always had cognitive issues, in the older years, if their presentation is the same, if cognition is the same, it doesn't mean that they have dementia. No, this would have to be a downward change. So that's the first thing. Secondly, in all the diseases that cause dementia, because dementia, Lynn, is a syndrome, it's not actually a disease, it's caused by 10 or 11 diseases or medical conditions, like Alzheimer's disease, cause and effect. Alzheimer's disease is a disease, obviously, that can cause dementia. Dementia is really a syndrome of symptoms. So when we think about it, what we look for is there always is a change, downward change in the ability to make new memories. It's not simply being forgetful, which could be really the result of misattention or not paying attention, but actually a real disability or problem in making a new memory. So that's number one. Number two, there must be at least one other significant cognitive problem. And by significant, I mean the kind that is noticeable and that negatively impacts everyday life. The most common one is what we call the executive function. So there are many different cognitive domains that we could speak to, but more often than not, in addition to memory, a person has difficulty in the executive functions. And essentially, for a family member, think about it this way. That's sort of the part of the brain that's the conductor of the orchestra, if you will. It's sort of the organizing function, the CEO of the brain. Sometimes we describe it in that way. So planning, sequencing, problem solving, consumption, things of that sort. Those are the executive skills that we actually live here in the prefrontal cortex of the brain. Next, the kind of deficits or impairment in these cognitive areas, and certainly there can be more than two, must disrupt or put a person at risk in terms of function. So function really applies to the activities of daily living and the instrumental or complex activities of daily living. So with respect to the latter, the ability to use the telephone, to go shopping, to do laundry, things of that sort. Everyday function, that's really important. And for the more basic activities, daily living, it could be ambulation, transferring, continence or incontinence, things of that sort. So that has to be the case. And then finally, the causes of these cognitive and functional problems cannot be due to depression, some other mood disorder, psychosis like schizophrenia, or delirium. And this last one is particularly important because delirium is caused by an infection, the wrong medications, too many medications, medication interaction effects, something of that sort. Because that's a correctable problem. And I think where you're going to lead us eventually is the correctable versus the uncorrectable problems with dementia. We have no tools yet to reverse the direction, though we may have some to slow it down. So that's, I think, a common way of thinking about dementia.
I think that's really helpful just to kind of have the framework to be thinking about, because we hear these labels, these terms, but it can be really confusing for folks. So when we think about dementia, is there just one type, or can there be different types of dementia?
Right. So this may be the second most common question that is asked. In addition to what is, or after what is dementia, what really causes it? So there are many different, up to a dozen causes of non-reversible dementia, put it that way. The most common one, of course, is Alzheimer's disease. Maybe it accounts for 65%, excuse me, of the dementias that we actually see. But there are other ones. So let's say something called vascular dementia, which is caused by strokes, is very common. A combination of the two, which is not surprising because there's a fair amount of evidence that maybe Alzheimer's disease at its heart or foundation is a vascular problem. It's sort of unclear, but it could be. You may have heard, if you're a family member, perhaps a loved one's been diagnosed with diffuse Lewy bodies dementia or frontotemporal dementia. There are a number of different kinds of illnesses. Where it's important is trying to understand progression of the illness, and are there certain cognitive deficits that are more pronounced with one illness, let's say Alzheimer's disease versus another one like frontotemporal dementia.
Okay. So when we're talking about, you mentioned progression and that they all have some type of progressive component. I'm guessing it's different for each individual person. Can you talk a little bit about what does that progression look like? I know sometimes we hear terms like early stage, middle stage, late stage. What does all of that really mean?
Yeah, so dementia by its very nature, regardless of what the cause is progressive. Dementia gets worse. The rate of change, though, varies. It varies both by the cause and by the person. So you could have an individual, two individuals with Alzheimer's disease. The progression or rate of change of their illness may differ because people are unique and their brains are unique. You know, you're talking about 100 billion neurons at play here and brain cells. So how they're connected is a little bit different, but the actual progression is fairly predictable. The rate of progression is less variable. You know, you talked about different stages. Again, I think the most maybe effective or easiest way of understanding progression in dementia, I think about it in terms of just 3 stages. There are models for 7 stages, for 9 stages, and so forth, but mild, moderate, and severe. And the reason why I think that's useful is that you can associate changes in function to each of those stages. So in the cognitive continuum, you have normal cognition on one end, you have dementia and the different stages in the next, and then you have that middle ground called MCI, or mild cognitive impairment, or minor neurocognitive disorder. It's another term that's often used. So progression can happen from every stage. And at some point, we can maybe today talk a little bit about MCI and how that might progress as well.
I like that idea of a continuum. I think that's helpful when we think about all of these moving parts, that you can move from one place to another, but it's not a quick progression, right? Some of these can move rather slowly, or as you mentioned, they can be variable depending on each individual person.
Sure. So you could think of Alzheimer's disease. I mean, the classic is a 9 to 10 year start to finish span, but that's misleading because usually people have comorbidities or other medical conditions that can make it worse and it can compound the problem. I mean, certainly there are people who have had dementia for 20 years, and those that maybe, like with frontal temporal dementia, might progress a little earlier, a little bit more quickly. So, you know, there is certainly that variability. One of the questions that families often have is, well, is there a time if someone's living in the community, maybe independently, where it's time for senior living or more support? Is that associated with stages of dementia? And it is. So usually toward the end of mild stage dementia, and definitely in moderate stage dementia, more support is necessary because the number of functional or ADL or IADL issues grow. And this is one reason why the BCAT test system is used so much, because it's very sensitive to these different stages and can predict function.
So what should family members be looking for? You bring up a really good point. Sometimes people start off in their home, and at some point along the course of this process, they may need more support, whether it's supervision or hands-on help doing tasks. What are family members looking for? What are some of those symptoms that they should be really mindful of that might be red flags or opportunities to start that conversation?
Sure, it's a wonderful question. I guess it depends a little bit about where someone's living, whether or not they have a spouse who is compos mentis, cognitively intact, and able to act in the caregiving role. You know, I would first start with attitude and then follow that up with what you actually see. And what I mean by that is it's very hard, if not impossible sometimes, but to be as dispassionate, as objective as you can. And that's really hard when we're talking about our parents or siblings or, you know, child, actually, adult child. So by dispassion, what I really mean is don't make excuses. Try to really see things in the way that they are, and that's really challenging. So if you can try to do that, then I think you're looking at changes in function first. So it would be things like missing appointments, forgetting people's names, especially making errors in medication. As somebody gets older, the likelihood of them having more complex regimens around medication increase. Doesn't mean that all listeners here have a loved one who's on 9 medications, but medications can be complicated. And so even little things that the rehab therapists, such as yourself, do so well, which is really, let's check the pill box, let's make sure that things are going all right. If you have a loved one who's a driver, you would be asking questions like, does mom or dad, are they getting confused? Are there even nicks around the car that weren't there before? In fact, we have at our research center a questionnaire people can access for free, where it kind of goes through sort of a checklist, really, about indications in driving that maybe there's a problem here in some way. So all the functional areas. Is somebody wearing clothing that they haven't, let's say that they've worn the same outfit, for 10 days in a row. Now that's difficult to do when you only talk to a family member on the phone. Maybe with Zoom and Skype and everything else, it's a little bit easier in some ways. But you look for those basic things. And if you're unsure, look at your own life. Think about, just write down the things that you have to do every day. Think about how many of those things does your loved one have to do, and then start looking for, are there problems, are there problems where there are areas where there are problems.
Okay, that's some really good common sense approaches, some things to be keeping an eye out for. It's a great list. Thank you for sharing that. You talked a little bit about getting a professional team around you. You talked about maybe rehab, and I know a lot of times family members feel like they're going it alone. I know, there's a lot of benefit to having professionals involved in each family member's care and sort of building that team, so you have that expertise along for the ride to guide you, to have answers to your questions. If you suspect there's been a change, being able to reach out and confirm that in some way. What are your recommendations for family members when they're looking to build that professional team around themselves? How do they go about that? And who would be on that team?
So there are a lot of questions in that, and everyone is important. We created a free tool. Just in listening to you, you're reminding me of it. At least starting cognitively, a cognitive self-assessment that a family member actually can complete. It's called My Mem Check. As I said, it's free, it's fast, you can do it in just a few minutes. You can access it on a website called enrichvisits.com. So that can be a beginning point. What's nice about My Mem Check is that it's a validated scale, it's used in primary care, it's peer-reviewed and published, so it's got good science behind it. But it's a self-assessment or assisted or done by a proxy by a family member. And what's nice about it is that it generates a report. Why is that important? Well, because that report can be emailed or presented to a physician or a healthcare provider, so you can begin the conversation. Quite often when you go to a physician, a family member maybe is accompanying an older adult or loved one. The physician has to do a lot of things in those visits and sometimes needs an objective starting point. So My Mem Check is a terrific starting point. So starting with the primary care provider is a good way to start building out the team. With dementia, whether it's caused by Alzheimer's disease or something else, it's really important that families think about team and broadening it and changing who's on the team with progression. Even in senior living or a nursing home, if that is indicated down the road, or even now, you still have to have a team, because there are medical issues, there are psychosocial issues, there are legal financial issues. You might need, for example, an elder law attorney. You might need a geriatric care manager to kind of help you in some way. So think more broadly, but I always believe starting with primary care is a good way to begin, share your concerns, create an open channel of communication, but know that it may be at some point that you need a neuropsychological evaluation, neurocognitive evaluation to find out the specific deficits. That can be done even before an imaging study is done, but there's nothing to stop you from doing an imaging study. All those things are important. And there are medications, but I must tell you that we don't have great ones right now for all this. And in fact, I know that in the Family Matters series, Dr. Susan Lehman from Hopkins is going to talk about some of those memory enhancers in particular.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of buzz out there. Families are really interested in slowing the progression of dementia. You know, they want their family member, to be as independent as possible for as long as possible. And I know you mentioned some of those medications. Can you tell us a little bit about what are some ways to slow decline? Is there anything that families can do that can be proactive to really help their family member either stay in their home setting longer or just maintain their independence and their quality of life for as long as possible?
Yeah, because the goal is quality of life and living as independently as possible. And sometimes if you can build resources, give resources to people, they can then almost paradoxically live more independently, right? You're trying to stop the decline. If indeed, as it is the case, that dementia is progressive and the rate is variable, can we just change the rate? So sure, changing onset is really important. So there are things that anyone can do, a family member can do to slow the actual onset. Again, that same website, Enrich Visits, they're free tools for doing that, like the Enrich calculator. I know you know about that and so forth. But for someone who already is starting down the path, so these are sort of the areas that you can focus on. I mean, certainly you can look at medications. Nootropics or the memory enhancers are one area to look, but they're not particularly effective. That doesn't mean that they aren't useful for a period of time, but so far, we're hopeful that we're going to get better ones in the near future. Working memory exercises, if you're in the mild stage of dementia, and maybe even in the moderate stage of dementia, working memory exercises. These are very specific exercises. We recommend some books in particular, working memory exercise books that would be key. There's good science that would suggest that they can be very effective in that respect. Outside of the cognitive and medication domains, though, lifestyle is important. Use it or lose it. Good cardiovascular health is important. Social stimulation is important for several reasons. I mean, one is what happens with dementia is that a person begins to narrow their life, so they don't get enough stimulation. Social stimulation is not only good in terms of mood, but it promotes those connections among brain cells and neurons. So you might think that just visiting is good socially, but it's also good cognitively. So maintaining as active, but not an overwhelmingly so, a lifestyle is really important. Proper diet, really important. Again, none of these things are going to prevent someone from developing, let's say, dementia caused by Alzheimer's, but they may delay onset. And for those who already have it, they may actually slow down the progression.
Okay, great ideas. I know we're almost out of time, but can you revisit or repeat for our family members that website that you mentioned earlier and how to access that My Mem Check tool, which has sounded like a really great starting point to kind of spot check your cognitive skills, and then also the working memory exercise book?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. So www.enrichvisits.com. It's a website for families and for patients. The idea is to give people tools that they can use, generally free tools that they can use. That said, there is a resource on there, bookstore on there for specific books that are devoted to working memory in particular. So good science among all of them. You know, as you know, at BCAT, it's science first, and then trying to figure out a way of getting tools into the hands of people so that we can slow decline, or in some cases, maybe even prevent the development of dementia. And My Mem Check also, it's possible that your primary care physician's already using it, but likely not. And so this could be a tool that would be really very helpful for them too.
Great information. Well, thank you so much for taking the time today to answer all of these questions and to give us a nice overview about the progression of Alzheimer's disease and dementia and sort of what to expect. For our family members, thank you. For our family members who are joining today, if you have any questions, you're able to submit those to us now through the Q&A, and we will circle back to you and ensure that you get your answers from Dr. Mansbach. We're going to close this out today at this time, and hopefully everyone can join us for our next series, and we'll be sharing that information with you all in the future. Thank you.
Good to see you, Lynn. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Lynn and Dr. Mansbach. That was a great presentation, a lot of really good, important information. We'd like to take this opportunity, if you haven't already, to invite you to become a member of the Enrich Brain Health Program by signing up on our Enrich website. And if you're interested in more information from the BCAT Research Center, you can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And here are the links for those. If you have any questions, you can go ahead and type them into the chat box. I see we have a couple in there already, so we'll get back to you guys with those answers in about 2 to 3 business days. Thank you all again so much for joining this episode of the Family Matters series. And we hope to see you again for our next episode in January, entitled The Benefits and Limitations of Memory Enhancement Medications for Persons with Dementia. Is it a right fit for my loved one? We're really excited about the episodes we have coming up in 2022. We have a lot of really great speakers. We're going to talk about some important topics. So we hope that you'll join us for those episodes as well. I'll go ahead and stay in the meeting room for a couple more minutes, just in case anybody wants to put some questions in there. And otherwise, I hope you all have a great night and a great holiday.